Well, before we get Alex on, we're going to be talking about left populism, sort of where we're at in the movement right now. Really looking forward to that. Matt, do you think you could give folks an update on what's been happening in Atlanta?
Yeah, so there was a city council vote, one that I don't think, I would have it'd been nice if the city council surprised us and voted against funding Cop City, but the cops and people seemed to kind of telegraph that that wasn't going to be the case. Intercept has a new article here. It's interesting to note that of the four. So, well, first let's go about public
Yeah.
comment. A lot of people have been seeing these images of the people waiting in line to speak their voice about what they have to say about this. Not really content with maybe how they were expecting the city council to vote on this. And here's this guy, and I think this way, like, look, we have all sorts of reasons for understanding why investments in more policing and like counterinsurgency domestically, basically, isn't exactly what this country needs, or is the exact opposite to what this country needs to be doing with its public funds. But I think the way this guy puts it, in terms of like, well, I'll let him say this and then we'll comment on it.
I live in Southwest Atlanta in District 10 with my wife and daughter. Both my wife and I grew up here. Our families call Atlanta home, and we are deeply rooted and invested in this city and its future. I've never spoken at council before, but I've been so disturbed by how the city has ignored the voices of its constituents, lied about how much money is going to this facility, violently suppressed its own residents for protesting and organizing to stop the destruction of Woolani Forest, just so that the police can build a new training center that we don't need, that we don't want. I knew I had to be here today. I have a little girl. She's about to turn 2. She's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I never knew I could love someone so much. On our way to daycare in the morning, we sing songs as I try to avoid the potholes that have been there for years. I drive by neighbors waiting at bus stops with no benches, no shelters from the rain. We see unhoused neighbors and community members sleeping under makeshift shelters. And we see cop cars cruising our neighborhood all day, every day. I've been harassed on more than one occasion by the cops in my neighborhood. They make me feel the opposite of safe. Spending $60 million taxpayer dollars on a new police training facility is the most heartbreaking, reckless, and quite frankly, anti-black thing this city has ever proposed in my lifetime. I cannot believe I'm standing here pleading for you to not spend the tax dollars of a black city to tear down a forest in a black neighborhood, to increase the policing and caging of more and more black people, all this in a city with black leadership. I'm tired of it. Just think of what $60 million can do to care, educate, house, and nurture the people of the city, the children of the city. Say no to Cop City. Thank you.
And I think that the message it sends, what you're doing with these investments, right? Like, is really, I don't know how much further you need to go than that. Because I mean, I remember growing up in Bismarck, we were getting a nice big community center with a football field. That felt awesome. And like the one thing, and like, I mean, it's just, and so like, okay, so overwhelmingly, the city council, I believe it was 13-4, somewhere around there, 4 votes against the funding. The Intercept piece goes into the where those go, but not surprisingly, especially the district closest to it would be Atlanta's 5th district, most vocal in opposition to this.
Mm-hmm.
All 4 of those no votes were from elected folks, folks elected in 2021, which is interesting. And this is and so we have a couple groups here. We have the Chris Carr, the Georgia Attorney General, who is obviously like and the sort of non-Atlanta Republicans want to use this as a way to stick it to Antifa, obviously, right? And you obviously have the genuine anarchist, Antifa, but forest defender type folks who are putting their neck on the line. Literally, one of them has been killed by cops during this. But I think also you have one, as mentioned, these districts which are closest to the neighborhood are the ones most in opposition. And right now the city council's like, yeah, well, that's too diffuse. So you know what? So what? We got all these other districts which are far away from it. They don't seem to be as animated as you are. And like I think we mentioned on a previous episode here, it should have been, you have something like this that's getting this contentious, you put that to a wide referendum. as opposed to this sort of I mean, this is what this sort of I guess politics is for. The way this was designed this way is to make that diffuse that energy across the electorate that isn't quite so animated.
Yeah, and like, just to remind folks, we've done a few segments on this that go into more in depth. What is was finally agreed to by the city council is almost double what was originally proposed. The city council sort of made it seem like, oh no, we've always been honest about how much money this was going to be. You just didn't read the plan properly, which in my opinion is absolutely bogus. And it's just, I mean, it's an incredible amount of money. About I believe something like 60 million of that is direct taxpayer. The rest of it is coming from massive corporations. Remember when we had Jamie Peck on the show? One of the things that's really notable about it is, remember, Atlanta makes a lot of movies and TV now. Part one of the stipulations is that the movie studios, the local movie and TV studios, will be able to use Cop City to make good cop movies in the near future, right? So there's a lot of, like, on top of the fact of like the way the Republicans are trying to utilize this for their statewide and national ambitions. There's just a lot of like capitalist forces that have been engaged in this process from the very beginning, and clearly, and we've played a lot of the conversations that have happened in city council and with other elected officials and the public. It's very clear that the public, I mean, that the local politicians have very little interest in hearing from the community. Remember, like, this is like really important, that 8 of the yes votes for funding Cop City were Democrats. Now, Atlanta, just for people who don't know, like, it's one of those non-official partisan states, but these
Mhm.
people run, and it's very clear which political party they're affiliated with, right? And it shows how dangerous to this kind of like Biden, post-Biden philosophy of like how we're going to change Southern politics is, because the Democratic Party in those cities is very, very willing to turn their backs on the people just as much as the Republican Party has
Yeah.
been. And it creates the situation where the only thing you can do is create these kind of community organizations to push back and fight back. But as long as the interests of capital have their control over these politicians, right? You can make a lot of noise, but they're still going to try to push this through anyway. Who knows
Yeah.
what will happen in the coming weeks with this? I know people are very adamant that this fight is not over. But it's an extremely negative chapter, along with the fact, as I'm sure you're about to go into, with the real suppression of public dissent that we've seen in the state of Georgia on this issue particularly.
Exactly, that sort of thing from the official Democrats or Democratic electeds, the basically to go from, kente cloth during the George Floyd protests to now minor throat clearing, uh, about civil rights, as 3 folks, Marlon Scott Couts, 39, Adele McLean, 42, both from Atlanta, and Savannah Patterson, 30, arrested, charged with money laundering and charity fraud, for a bail fund related to this. And that is like that's how these movements, which we idealize in many ways now, the 70s resistance movements, that's how those were hamstrung.
Yeah. And look, it's a dark chapter here. We have, like, in March, a judge charged 22 people with domestic terrorism. Just last week, 3 Atlanta activists were arrested for because they ran a fund that's bailing out protesters. The state attorney general of Georgia has been trying to throw the book at people in ways that even like the generally reactionary judiciary has said are laughable.
Right.
In similar ways as what we see here in Texas too, where like when these Republicans want to sort of make a national or state name for themselves, they try to utilize state power in the most absurd and aggressive and nasty ways possible. So it's nice when they aren't able to fully utilize them. But again, it just shows, I mean, it's complete
You
state
don't want
capture
that
by like
dance.
anti people,
You don't want
forces.
that dance between like judges who are absolute mutants themselves being reasonable as the fascist Republicans twirl around. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not going to be good.